I want to ask you a question, and this is of the greatest importance, especially when concerning China. We know that Chinese Taipei is recognized as an integral part of mainland China. Almost every nation in the world recognizes Taiwan to be a part of the one China. We know that the United States policy states that they accept and believe in the one China policy. Okay. Now, if that is the case, why does the United States continue to train, arm, and finance what we would call a militia, a separatist militia that is trying to gain independence from the mainland? And why does the Chinese armed forces allow the United States to use this quote unquote freedom of navigation in the Taiwan Strait when that is actually Chinese territorial waters?
Okay, this is a great question. First, I want to talk about freedom of navigation because one of the main reasons U.S. use for freedom of navigation is that they say South China Sea is a very important international waterway, $6 trillion of traffic, world trade going through there. We have to protect the safety, integrity of this very important sea lane. Now, what they don't tell you, that very important sea lane, 80% of the traffic is going to and from China. So essentially what they're saying is they're protecting the vital Chinese sea lane from the Chinese.
I thought the best way to proceed was to get everyone in the one room.
Good thinking.
Okay, you're all right. I'll come straight to the point. This white paper is recommending we spend close to $400 billion over the forward estimates. Now, at some point, the PM is going to be asked a very simple question. In order to protect us from which enemy?
It's so hard to say.
400 billion, pick one.
A regional player.
Specifically, Colonel.
An Indo-Pacific regional player.
More specifically?
Indo-Asia Pacific.
That's broader. Who are you leaving out?
Europe?
Yeah, I sort of need a country.
Or an unaligned player.
No, a country.
One that might threaten us, just one.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to raise tensions.
Where?
In this room.
You know what? I'll name one and you just nod. China. Yeah, okay. And what exactly are we protecting?
Strategic interests.
Specifically, Colonel?
Indo-Pacific strategic
Again,
interests.
Brigadier, really specifically.
Indo-Asia Pacific strategic
You know what?
interests.
I'll say it and then you nod. Our trade routes. Yeah. And who is our number one trading partner?
Shall we use the nod system?
Sure. China? Yeah. So under this scenario, we're spending close to $30 billion a year to protect our trade with China from China. And that doesn't strike anyone at this table as odd?
And you know, like this is completely ridiculous. What they're actually doing is they're just, you know, parading around China's store steps and shows China's like, look, we can screw up your very important sea lane anytime we want to, because you know we have the military power there. We can disrupt your international traffic. I mean, U.S. military makes no secret about they see the Strait of Malacca as a choking point for the Chinese energy needs, because right now China imports a lot of energy from the Middle East and from Africa, and all that goes on oil tankers, travels through the Strait of Malacca at Singapore and travel up South China Sea. So U.S. Navy is like, hey, you know, I can cut that off for you, you know, like you know, and this is but in the Western media that got flipped around like 180 degrees, of course. And now the Taiwan issue, actually U.S. was essential in creating the Taiwan issue in the first place, but because the Taiwan issue is basically unresolved legacy of the Chinese Civil War.
Right.
And in 1950, so in 1949, the Chiang Kai-shek's KMT government, they lost the Chinese Civil War, so they fled to Taiwan with the military. And in early part of 1950, Mao was about to order People's Liberation Army to cross the Taiwan Strait and liberate Taiwan. And then Korean War broke out in June that year, 1950. And Then Truman authorized U.S. 7th Fleet to sail into the Taiwan Strait to explicitly prevent the People's Liberation Army from cross. But at that time, Chinese couldn't do anything because in 1949, the People's Liberation Army didn't have a navy. They didn't have a navy. They didn't have air force. So when the U.S. aircraft carrier battle group sails through the Taiwan Strait, there's not much they could do. And this is the origin of the separation of the island of Taiwan with the mainland China. It's through the U.S. military intervention in 1950. And just to remind our audience, in June 1950, China was not part of the Korean War. And yet U.S. intervened in the Chinese Civil War is because at that time, U.S. sees this like communism, they're all the same. They see that it's the same conflict. What happened in Korea, China, Taiwan, and also in Vietnam at the same time. They saw like this is spread of Asian communism. But I actually read the Robert McNamara memo to Johnson in 1965 about basically justifying sending U.S. ground troops to Vietnam. It was very interesting because he specifically mentioned China. He said there is a potential that China will be able to put together an Asian coalition that is anti-American, that will be against our interests. We cannot allow this to happen. This is why we need to be in Korea. This is why we need to be in Vietnam. So originally, it was all about containing China, and this is why U.S. intervened in the Taiwan Strait in June 1950. But the consequence of that is that 500,000 PLA troops that was lining up to go to Taiwan, Mao then take them, sent them to the north, cross the Yalu River into Korea in October that year. So that directly led to the Chinese intervention in the Korean War, and also the U.S. has been always part of the problem, man. In East Asia, U.S. has a long history of imperialism and militarism, starting from the Spanish-American War when U.S. fought Spain so they can grab Philippines as a colony. And at that time, the Filipino initially welcomed the Americans because they thought they were liberators, liberating them from the Spanish. But Americans like, no, we're here to stay. You are mine now. You are my territory. And that led to the American-Filipino War, which led to some people estimate anywhere from like 300,000 to 1 million Filipino death. And there was a cartoon also from that time. There was a political cartoon about, it's explicitly said Philippines is just about a stepping stone to China. So China was always the end goal because U.S. see China as a big market, access to cheap labor, and the Philippines was just to position U.S. closer to China. And U.S. involvement in Taiwan was part of that same strategy. Even back in 1860s, when Commodore Perry was sailing to forcibly open Japan for trade, he stopped in Taiwan and he noted the strategic location of Taiwan. He actually made 1850s, I'm sorry. He made a recommendation to the U.S. administration then that U.S. should seize Taiwan, so he can put a coaling station on Taiwan for his Navy, for the American Navy in East Asia. But only thing that put a stop to that is because American Civil War broke out. So, people forgot about it. But then U.S. came back through the Philippines, and U.S. people don't realize U.S. had a Yangtze patrol. U.S. Navy was patrolling the entire length of Yangtze River for 100 years, from 1850, the Second Opium War, to 1949, 1950, until Mao kicked them out. And this is the origin of antagonism of U.S. against China and the communist government, because China is asserting its sovereignty. It refused to be an American colony, and whereas Taiwan today is still very much an American client state. And the things will change in 1972, when Henry Kissinger moved to when the Henry Kissinger, I saw some questions. I'll address them later. But when in 1970s, when Kissinger moved to China to open up the Nixon's visit, so when Nixon visited Shanghai, he signed the Shanghai Communique with then Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai, which is specifically said we recognize, both Chinese people on both sides of the Taiwan Strait recognize that Taiwan is part of China. We don't challenge that. This is a Taiwan issue, is an issue for the Chinese on both sides to deal with. So that was the foundation of the Sino-American relationship going forward, leading to the normalization of the ties in the 1979 under Carter. And this right now, U.S. is destroying the foundation of the Sino-American ties that was put together between Nixon and Zhou Enlai in the 1972. And the reason they do that is they really want to return to the Cold War. Like some of the reason we already covered, because the U.S. feels threatened. It's a hegemonic grip on the world feels threatened. And U.S. have, so before, in the 1950s, people don't know this. In the 1954, U.S. actually threatened to use nuclear weapon against mainland China if China were to take over some offshore, not even Taiwan, just some offshore islands, like a couple, a few miles off the coast of mainland China. And then that was only overruled because at the time Soviet Union extended its nuclear umbrella to China. But in 1958, they were thinking about doing the same thing to China because China didn't have a nuclear weapon back then. And so U.S. actually placed nuclear-tipped missiles on Taiwan since 1958, pointed at mainland China. And U.S. at some point rotated through 60,000 troops through Taiwan during the Vietnam War. And all that troops, military, and nuclear weapons was pulled out as a result of Nixon visit. Now the U.S. is trying to undo all that by, starting from Trump administration. Trump started to put U.S. Marines to the so-called the AIT, the American Institute on Taiwan, which is what they call the de facto embassy, by claiming that as a American diplomatic compound, it entitles Marine protection. What do they need to protect from the Taiwanese boba vendors? I mean, like, are you kidding me? Taipei is a very safe city, and besides, that was not even supposed to be an American diplomatic compound. It's the whole point they call it American Institute on Taiwan is because they can't call it an embassy because U.S. do not officially recognize the government on Taiwan, and so but they're now sabotaging their own prior position on one China principle is because now they want to use Taiwan as a proxy against mainland China, the same way they're using Ukraine as a proxy against Russia. And General Douglas MacArthur, he actually called during our Korean War, he actually called Taiwan the unsinkable aircraft carrier. That's what U.S. sees Taiwan as. It's just an unsinkable aircraft carrier they can use to strike at mainland China anytime they please. And this is why they are now stirring up the pot, so to speak. People hear about this Taiwan mainland tension, but they don't realize the relationship was actually pretty good up to 2014. Xi Jinping and the Taiwan leader Ma Ying-jeou actually met in Singapore. Before that, then the KMT government in Taiwan was about to sign a free trade deal with the mainland China. Things were going great until this had the so-called sunflower revolution in Taiwan. At the same time, the Euromaidan quote-unquote revolution was happening in Kiev, and so these youth who are funded by the Western NGOs, they stormed the Taiwan parliament. And they demanded a stop to this free trade deal with China because it threatens our freedom. I mean, like, it's the same talking point that the U.S. is putting out about China right now. Trade with China is a threat to our freedom. And so that after that, a new administration after 2014. More pro-U.S. Government got into power in Taiwan, the DPP government, and But they were very unpopular from 2014 to 2015 to 2019. But then Hong Kong protests happened, and during the Hong Kong protest, they pump a lot of the fear mongering information on Taiwan. Like, okay, if we became part of China, we're going to turn into Hong Kong. Hong Kong is an example what we do not want to become. So that fear mongering tactic worked in the 2019 Taiwan election. It got the second term for the DPP president, even though her approval rating was single digit heading into the election. And after that, it flipped and she got reelected. And so now this is how, U.S. kind of always interfere in its client state proxy. And Taiwan now is one of the best customers for the U.S. military industrial complex. Taiwan, unlike Ukraine, which received like hundreds of millions of dollars from U.S. for free, Taiwan pays for them with hard currency, because Taiwan actually has one of the world's largest trade surplus, foreign currency reserve accumulated through their trade surplus. And so this is a way for U.S. to recycle that dollar back, not to average Americans, back to the military industrial complex of Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, etc. And so this is why they're raising tensions right now, because they're selling weapons to Taiwan. And if you look at the weapon sales, they're selling all these very old, selling these kind of outdated, expensive weapon platform to Taiwan that Taiwan won't even need. They're selling tanks to Taiwan. So when you need tanks if you need tanks to defend Taiwan, that means the Chinese army is already landed. You'll be too late. That will be too late. Those tanks ain't going to do shit. So sorry, I don't know if I can swear. Yeah. Those tanks ain't going to do shit once the Chinese army land. But this is not about defending Taiwan. Just like the U.S. military is not about defending America. It's about making the military-industrial complex people rich. And unfortunately, these people are willing to destabilize one of the most important ties in the world right now for personal profit, because they really don't care about the rest of us. Okay, so should we address some of the questions?
Yeah, with this question here, I want to